In the heart of a suburban paradise known as Maplewood Estates, the streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns and charming homes that were a testament to the community's zeal for order and aesthetics. Each house followed the same architectural blueprint, creating a seamless tapestry of pastel colors and well-maintained gardens. It was a place where everyone prided themselves on conformity, and the Homeowners Association played a pivotal role in maintaining this utopia. Behind the manicured facades, however, simmered an undercurrent of tension, primarily due to the notorious figure in the neighborhood, Karen Thompson. To many residents, she was a self-appointed guardian of the community's unwritten rules, with an unwavering commitment to enforcing the HOA's guidelines. Often spotted in her perfectly pressed blouse, ironically adorned with a floral pattern resistant to the chaos around her, Karen wielded her clipboard like a weapon, equipped with a checklist and an eagle eye. Over time, Karen had cultivated an impressive reputation, though not one that was admired. Neighbors whispered stories of her relentless pursuit of perfection, recounting how she once forced a family to repaint their mailbox because it clashed with the neighborhood's color scheme. Another apt example was when she waged war against families who dared to leave out holiday decorations past a mandated timeframe, sending sternly worded letters that felt more like ultimatums than mere suggestions. New residents could often be seen approaching their homes with excitement, only to soon discover the unspoken truth about Karen. Cross her and you'd have hell to pay. Some neighbors labeled her the HOA's enforcer, while others simply referred to her as Karen, recognizing that her name had become a colloquial abbreviation for anyone acting entitled and overbearing. As I settled into my new home in this pristine community, I initially viewed Karen as a comical character, a source of entertainment rather than annoyance. However, this lighthearted perception shifted dramatically when I unwittingly found myself on her radar. Having recently parked my truck in front of my home after returning from a long day at work, I took little notice of the unwritten neighborhood protocols regarding vehicle placement. Unbeknownst to me, my lack of adherence would soon ignite a firestorm. Karen's eyes landed on my truck, which bore the slight imperfections of everyday life. A few scratches from grocery runs and an unapologetically cluttered bed filled with sports equipment and tools. Yes, it wasn't as pristine as the glossy vehicles gleaming in driveways nearby, but it was mine. In hindsight, that day marked the beginning of an unexpected war, a battle of wills between my desire for independence and her unyielding need for control. As I became more acquainted with life in Maplewood Estates, I began to appreciate its seemingly quaint facade contrasted by Karen's intense vigilance. Behind the humming lawnmowers and polite smiles lay tensions that could erupt at any moment, just as they would when she ultimately decided to take justice into her own hands and forcefully liberate my truck for what she deemed transgressions against the community. Little did she know that her actions would kindle an unexpected spark of retaliation within me, one I hadn't anticipated but would soon set into motion. It was a sunny Saturday morning when the tension in Maplewood Estates reached its breaking point. I had just returned home from a gargantuan grocery run, my truck loaded with heavy bags of essentials. As I parked it in front of my house, I was blissfully unaware that my vehicle had inadvertently become the epicenter of Karen's scrutiny. The day started as most weekends did. Neighbors were out mowing their lawns and waving at one another. Children laughed as they played in backyards, and I felt a sense of contentment perched on my front porch. However, this tranquility shattered when Karen appeared at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, clipboard in hand and an expression that suggested she had just discovered a crime scene. Without warning, she stomped over to me, her floral blazer almost comically contrasting with the severity of her demeanor. "Excuse me," she began, her voice dripping with indignation. "Are you aware that your truck is violating HOA guidelines?" Caught off guard by her accusation, I blinked in disbelief. "What do you mean?" I stammered, trying to process how parking my truck could ever be a violation. She listed rule after rule. My truck's color clashed with the neighborhood palette, which was absurd considering every other car sported vibrant hues. It was parked too close to the sidewalk, the line barely nicked the curb, and worst of all, it brought down property values in her eyes. "Karen, it's just a work truck." I tried to explain, but my words fell on deaf ears. Her response came in the form of a haughty reprimand about community standards and how even a slight deviation could unravel the fabric of Maplewood Estates. The more she spoke, the less logical she sounded. Her self-righteousness galvanized something within me, a mix of disbelief and defiance. It was not just about parking. It became clear that this was about control, her need to dictate another person's life for what she deemed acceptable. And then came the unthinkable twist. Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. "I'll be moving this eyesore," she declared, nodding toward my beloved truck as if it were a piece of trash rather than my means of transportation. Before I could even register her intent or protest adequately, she climbed into the driver's seat with an alarming confidence that left me stunned. "Hey, you can't just take my truck," I shouted, trying to reason with her as panic set in. But she merely smirked and turned the ignition on like some sort of misguided vigilante enforcing justice. With a screeching tire sound, she peeled away from my driveway without concern or courtesy. A blatant theft masked under an ill-conceived notion of righteousness. My heart raced as I watched the rear end of my truck disappear down the street, carrying not only metal but also all forms of pride and principles I thought would remain untouched in this seemingly idyllic neighborhood. That moment marked not just the theft of my vehicle. It ignited something deeper, a firestorm awakened by Karen's blatant disregard for personal property and autonomy. It was here that I vowed to reclaim not just my truck but also my dignity in a standoff against her oppressive regime. Little did Karen know that her impulsive decision to steal what wasn't hers would set off a chain reaction far beyond her control. One where ingenuity and rebellion would soon clash spectacularly against her stringent ideals. The moment I realized my truck was gone, a wave of disbelief washed over me. Standing on my front porch, I stared at the empty space where it had been parked just moments ago, feeling as if the ground had been pulled out from under me. My heart raced, and a knot formed in my stomach as panic set in. How could this be happening? Karen's audacity had crossed a line I never thought anyone would dare to breach. The first emotion that hit me was anger, fury boiling up from my core. It wasn't just that she had taken my vehicle. It was the sheer violation of personal space and boundaries that ignited something primal inside me. Who did she think she was? My truck wasn't merely a hunk of metal. It was a part of my identity, a tool for work and a vessel for memories. Every scratch and dent told a story, one that Karen would now erase with her arrogant disregard. As the anger surged, frustration quickly followed like an unwelcome shadow. I paced back and forth on the porch, trying to make sense of the absurdity of it all. I could hear the laughter of children playing in nearby yards, their innocence starkly contrasting with my spiraling emotions. How could everyone else exist in blissful ignorance while I faced this injustice? I thought about all those times when neighbors casually discussed their grievances but dismissed mine as trivial or overblown. Now here I was, at the mercy of someone who felt entitled to impose her will on others without consequence. Disbelief began to morph into helplessness as I considered what this meant for my life in Maplewood Estates. This wasn't just about losing a truck. It felt like losing control over my own existence within this community, the very foundation of autonomy that I believed every resident should have. The neighborhood's veneer of serenity cracked under the weight of Karen's actions, revealing an unsettling truth about how fragile our seemingly perfect lives could be. I couldn't help but replay the confrontation in my mind, recalling her smug expression as she climbed into my truck and drove away. The casual ease with which she acted made it clear that she viewed herself above reproach, above any consequences for her impulsive thievery. As thoughts swirled around like storm clouds in my head, waves of humiliation washed over me. How could this woman dictate what was acceptable? How had I allowed myself to become embroiled in such a ridiculous power struggle? With every passing minute without my truck, resentment festered. Not only did Karen's actions threaten my sense of security, but they also called into question everything I'd come to expect from Maplewood Estates, a community built on respect and neighborly kindness. The emotional turmoil culminated in a resolve that perhaps surprised even myself. I wouldn't let her get away with this blatant act of thievery. In that moment filled with anguish and indignation, clarity emerged. I needed to reclaim not just my truck, but also my sense of self-worth against Karen's oppressive rule. Little did she know that her theft would ignite a fire within me, a determination to fight back against her tyranny in whatever way necessary. This was more than just an affront. It was now personal, and it was time for action. As the initial shock of losing my truck turned into a simmering rage, a plan began to coalesce in my mind. A plan rooted in resourcefulness and determination. I needed to reclaim not only my vehicle but also my sense of agency in a community that had been turned upside down by one woman's delusions of grandeur. The stakes were high, and I needed to act quickly. The first step in my mission was to assess the situation. I couldn't let Karen drive off comfortably with my truck. If she got too far, the idea of getting it back could become far more complicated. It was clear that I needed to sabotage my own vehicle in a way that would ensure it wouldn't run properly but without causing permanent harm. My goal wasn't to destroy it but rather to create enough inconvenience so that Karen would be forced to stop. I gathered up my tools: screwdrivers, wrenches, and duct tape, all items that reminded me of weekends spent tinkering away on various projects. The sense of familiarity bolstered my confidence as I headed towards the truck parked snugly in my driveway, now reoccupied by her unassuming presence. My first thought was the fuel system. It seemed like the perfect target. A small adjustment would be enough to cause sputtering and stall before she could cover any significant distance. With deliberate movements, I opened the hood and inspected the engine. My heart raced at the thought of what I was about to do. Carefully, I loosened the fuel line just enough so that eventual pressure could create a leak. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to disrupt a smooth drive. As I worked swiftly yet quietly, stealing glances at neighboring houses to ensure no prying eyes were watching me tamper with my own property, I felt a surge of exhilaration at taking back control over this bizarre situation. Next, I decided to tinker with the electrical system. A mischievous grin crept across my face as new ideas took root. Disconnecting one terminal from the battery just slightly would be enough for her first attempts at starting the truck to yield frustrating results. She'd likely chalk it up to some random electrical issue that needed fixing rather than realizing she was actually playing into my hands. After completing these adjustments, I stepped back and surveyed my handiwork with satisfaction. My vehicle still looked perfectly normal. If anything, it merely reflected the lived-in character it always wore proudly. I knew Karen would expect nothing less than an easy getaway, but I had just rigged a series of hiccups designed to throw her off her game entirely. As anticipation coursed through me like wildfire, a thrill replaced the previous feelings of powerlessness. This battle was not only about retrieving a beloved possession, it was about standing up against oppression represented by someone who believed they held all the cards in our neighborhood chess match. In that moment filled with both anxiety and anticipation, clarity struck. Through wit and ingenuity, I could visually dismantle Karen's prescriptive hold on everyday life here at Maplewood Estates. Now all there was left to do was wait for Karen to return and unwittingly activate the scheme I had carefully orchestrated against her relentless overreach. The stage was set for both comedy and reckoning. Would she comprehensively understand what she had unleashed upon herself? Only time would tell as I braced for our impending confrontation filled with discovery and perhaps even retribution against her inflated sense of authority. The moment had arrived, and I could hardly contain my anticipation as I waited for Karen to return for her next act of bravado. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over Maplewood Estates, a stark contrast to the simmering tension bubbling within me. I positioned myself strategically behind my front window, careful to remain hidden while keeping a close watch on the driveway. When she finally appeared, strutting towards my truck with that familiar air of entitlement, a surge of adrenaline shot through me. Dressed in her perfectly pressed blazer and wielding an unbending conviction that she was in the right, she looked like she was about to award herself a trophy for some grand victory. The confidence radiating from her was palpable as she approached my vehicle, unbothered by any notion of propriety or respect. I watched as Karen casually slid into the driver's seat, her demeanor nonchalant as if she were simply borrowing a neighbor's lawnmower rather than committing outright theft. Her fingers danced over the steering wheel with glee. To her, this wasn't just about taking a truck. It was about exerting control over another's life, and she seemed certain that she had won this battle. With a flick of the key, the engine roared to life, at least initially. The sound echoed through the quiet street, a brief moment of triumph on her part as she grinned at what she perceived to be an easy victory. Her expression was one of smug satisfaction as she prepared to pull out of my driveway and assert her idea of order over my chaotic existence. But lurking beneath my veil of simmering rage was a glimmer of hope. The preparations I had made were about to come into play. As she shifted into gear and pressed down on the accelerator with enthusiasm, I held my breath in anticipation. Would the sabotage work? Would this proud display quickly turn into chaos? The truck rolled forward with familiar ease for just a moment before sputtering violently like a lion growling in protest at being roused from sleep. Karen's brow furrowed in confusion, but her initial confidence hadn't wavered yet. She pressed on, determined to make it work despite the strange hiccup in performance. But then came the second jab. My modifications kicked in full force as fuel began leaking from the line I had intentionally loosened. The sputtering escalated into something more severe, followed by unsettling noises echoing from under the hood. Karen's face shifted from one of triumph to bewilderment in an instant. Her confidence began to falter as panic crept in. She yanked hard on the steering wheel, trying to regain control of what felt like a spiraling situation. "What is happening?" she exclaimed incredulously, glancing frantically at the dashboard lights flashing ominously. It became abundantly clear that this was no ordinary vehicle malfunction but rather a disruptive act of rebellion against her overreach. In those moments, time seemed to stretch endlessly as I observed her struggle through my window. A mixture of disbelief and realization washing over her face as it genuinely sank in that she had miscalculated entirely. She nudged forward only briefly before feeling compelled to pull over on the side of the road, leaving behind her grand plan crumbling apart like dry leaves underfoot. It was almost poetic. The very vehicle that symbolized my independence was now playing host to Karen's downfall. In that moment of frustration and confusion, I felt an overwhelming sense of vindication wash over me. This was only round one in our unexpected showdown. I couldn't wait to confront her when she finally stepped out of that truck, ready not only to reclaim what was mine, but also to redefine the power dynamics clashing within our neighborhood. As Karen pressed down on the accelerator, the truck jolted forward, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed that all her plans were coming together. A satisfied smirk spread across her face. She was ready to assert her authority and drive away, leaving me in a cloud of frustration. But as fate would have it, the peaceful facade of Maplewood Estates would soon bear witness to her abrupt descent into chaos. Suddenly, the engine coughed violently, and Karen's expression shifted from triumph to bewilderment in a heartbeat. What had started with roaring confidence quickly morphed into confusion as the truck began to stutter like an old horse refusing to trot. "What the?" she muttered, glancing down at the dashboard lights flickering in protest. The truck sputtered again, this time sounding more like a disgruntled beast than a reliable vehicle. Karen tightened her grip on the steering wheel, eyebrows knitting together in concentration as if sheer willpower could solve the mysterious conundrum unfolding before her. She pressed down harder on the accelerator, convinced that if she just pushed it enough, the truck would miraculously return to normal. However, each attempt only accelerated its faltering pace. The engine roared angrily, then fell silent, producing strange popping sounds that echoed off the nearly deserted street. Frustration began to boil over as Karen maneuvered the vehicle with increasing agitation. "Come on!" she growled under her breath, casting desperate glances around as if someone might emerge from the bushes with a magic wand to fix her predicament. The reality was that there was no one else around. She was utterly alone in this absurd scenario of her own making. The truck lurched as it fought against her commands, a mechanical tantrum mirroring Karen's growing anxiety. She instinctively glanced over her shoulder to see if anyone was watching, but all eyes were unseen. I remained hidden inside my house, relishing every second of her confusion. How delightful it was to observe this confident woman now furrowing her brow at a truck that had become a sinking ship beneath her command. Before long, Karen's initial bravado turned into outright panic as she realized that the charming speed she anticipated was quickly fading away. With another sputtering cough and a subsequent silence punctuated by unsettling clinks and clanks from under the hood, it finally happened. The truck began to decelerate with a lurching thud until it came to an abrupt stop. "What is wrong with you?" she shouted at the dashboard in exasperation, shaking her head incredulously as if reprimanding an unruly child rather than a malfunctioning vehicle. Her indignation rose with each passing second as she clawed for control in a situation slipping through her fingers like sand. In that moment of futile struggle, a blend of anger and mortification overtook Karen's features. She knocked on the steering wheel lightly as if trying to rouse whatever spirit resided within this mechanical beast, but to no avail. The vehicle sat stubbornly still. The only movement came from flustered breaths escaping her lips. I could hardly contain myself. Watching Karen wrestle with something she believed she had dominion over was nothing short of poetic justice. This dramatic twist seemed to echo broader truths about power dynamics. Sometimes even the most self-assured individuals could fall flat when faced with their overreach. As I peered through the window, I felt an intoxicating thrill at witnessing the very embodiment of my defiant struggle then ultimately buckle under desperation and miscalculation. Soon enough, she'd have no choice but to confront me. Not just as an opponent in this peculiar tug-of-war for control, but potentially as someone forced to acknowledge that she misjudged both our community and me entirely. As the truck sputtered and misfired, Karen's confidence shifted into a frantic scramble for control. The vehicle jerked violently, pulling to the side as she wrestled with the steering wheel, trying to keep it moving. The street ahead stretched out like a cruel joke, mocking her attempts to assert her authority. With each desperate press of the accelerator, the engine protested with discontented growls, echoing her rising panic. "Come on, just work," she shouted, urgency lacing her voice as she gripped the wheel tighter. It was clear that her bravado from moments earlier had evaporated into thin air, replaced by frustration and disbelief. She felt like an uncoordinated dancer trying to follow the rhythm of a tune that had gone off-key. With every failed attempt to regain speed, the truck coughed and wheezed like an aging beast refusing to obey its master. The familiar surroundings of Maplewood Estates blurred past her window as she fought an uphill battle against machinery that seemed bent on defying her. The once serene neighborhood now bore witness to this chaotic spectacle. A woman who believed herself a champion of order was at war with a mere truck. Each passing moment intensified the drama unfolding on that quiet street. As she struggled to balance between accelerating and controlling the vehicle, Karen's mind raced with thoughts of how this could be happening. Could it truly be that my sabotaged vehicle was making a mockery of her? Her facade crumbled more with each sputter from under the hood. The thumping heartbeat of anxiety echoed in her ears as she wrestled with disbelief. 50 yards down the road, she felt a shift in momentum as the truck began to lose power altogether. Panic surged through her veins as she realized she wouldn't be able to keep going much longer. "No, no, no!" she exclaimed, looking wildly around for assistance, as if someone might emerge from behind a hedge to rescue her from this absurdity. The truck lurched once more before coming to an abrupt halt, a sudden stop that threw her forward in her seat, nearly hitting her head against the steering wheel. The silence that followed felt deafening. All that remained was the low whir of cooling machinery and Karen's frantic breaths filling the confined space around her. She glanced frantically at the dashboard lights blinking ominously at her, a parade of warnings highlighting just how unprepared she was for this predicament. With desperation etched across her face, Karen unbuckled her seatbelt and threw open the door in exasperation. Stepping out onto the asphalt, she scanned for any sign of help or justification for what had just transpired. The once powerful enforcer reduced to nothing but a flustered figure standing before a stubborn vehicle. Inside my home, I leaned closer to the window, barely able to contain my glee at witnessing this twist of fate unfold right before my eyes. This was no longer just about a truck. It was about power dynamics rearranging themselves in real time, a lesson in humility delivered by irony itself. As Karen stood there amid confusion and frustration, I knew our inevitable confrontation was approaching quickly. She would need to confront not only me but also the glaring truth. Her overreaching authority had led her here, to this moment of utter vulnerability in front of both my home and our community. Little did she know that by choosing this path, she'd inadvertently invited chaos into what she sought to control so desperately. And now it was time for me to reclaim what was rightfully mine while redefining our roles within Maplewood Estates altogether. The moment I saw Karen stepping out of the truck, A mix of triumph and apprehension washed over me. There she stood, disheveled and flustered, her earlier confidence stripped away by the chaos of her own making. As she approached my house, I felt a rush of adrenaline course through my veins. This was the confrontation I had been anticipating since she had stolen my truck. Karen's expression was a blend of anger and embarrassment as she finally faced me. "You think this is funny?" she demanded, her voice shaky yet laced with indignation. It was clear that the power dynamic had shifted, and now she was the one on the defensive. There was an almost palpable tension in the air, thick with unspoken words and unresolved issues. I stepped outside to meet her, trying to maintain a calm demeanor despite the exhilaration bubbling inside me. "You took my truck without permission," I replied, keeping my tone even. "What did you expect would happen?" My heart raced as I stood my ground, ready to reclaim not just my vehicle but also my dignity. "I was doing what needed to be done for the community," she shot back, but there was a quiver in her voice that betrayed her uncertainty. The bravado that had once defined her seemed like a mere mask slipping away under scrutiny. I could see her eyes darting around, searching for justification or perhaps hoping for some kind of support from an unseen audience that didn't exist today. "By stealing it?" I challenged, crossing my arms. "That's not how we resolve conflicts." As I spoke, I felt a sense of power surging within me. This wasn't merely about the truck anymore. It was about standing up to someone who had long imposed their will upon our neighborhood without regard for others. Karen opened her mouth to retort but faltered, clearly realizing how ridiculous her position had become. The silence stretched between us as we both absorbed the implications of what had transpired. Her attempt at control had backfired spectacularly. It was an awkward standoff, almost comical in its absurdity. "Look," she finally said, her voice quieter now, as if she were trying to regain some semblance of composure. "This isn't what I wanted." The admission hung in the air like a fragile peace offering. I took a step closer to the truck, which sat idling as if awaiting its rightful owner to reclaim it from this bizarre ordeal. "Then why did you take it?" I asked firmly but with a hint of curiosity. Her earlier bravado seemed to evaporate as she realized the consequences of her actions were now undeniable. With a heavy sigh and reluctance etched across her features, Karen glanced at the truck before looking back at me. "I'm sorry," she murmured, genuine frustration morphing into humility at last. "I shouldn't have taken it." Her acknowledgement felt like a small victory in itself. "Just give me my keys back," I said simply, the tension beginning to dissipate as I reached out my hand expectantly. With a resigned nod, Karen fished out the keys from her pocket and handed them over reluctantly. The moment our fingers brushed against each other felt electric, a signal that this unorthodox battle had come to an end. In that instant, something shifted between us. She was no longer merely an enforcer of rules, but a flawed person who had overstepped her bounds. As I turned away toward my truck, feeling its familiar weight and presence once again, I couldn't help but glance back at Karen. There was vulnerability in her stance now, a realization that perhaps authority came with responsibility and that true leadership involved listening rather than imposing will. In reclaiming my truck today, I felt like I'd also reclaimed something deeper, a sense of agency within Maplewood Estates where voices mattered beyond fear and intimidation. A small victory against an oversized ego that had long overshadowed our peaceful community life. In the days following the dramatic confrontation, the ripple effects of the incident began to manifest throughout Maplewood Estates. The once quiet neighborhood buzzed with newfound energy, and conversations that had previously revolved around lawn care and holiday decorations now turned to the remarkable showdown between Karen and me. Curiosity propelled residents to discuss what had transpired, many of whom had long felt stifled by Karen's relentless enforcement of HOA rules. Whispers of my defiance spread like wildfire, transforming me from a mere resident into an unexpected symbol of rebellion against the oppressive norms Karen had instilled. Neighbors who had previously kept their distance began approaching me with nods of approval and murmurs of gratitude, sharing their own stories of minor grievances they had suffered at the hands of her overreach. Even those who had initially sided with Karen were beginning to question her methods. A few neighbors recounted instances where she had imposed fines for trivial offenses or issued stern warnings for innocuous violations. The narrative shifted. What was once seen as her unwavering commitment to community standards was now being interpreted as a display of power that overshot its bounds. This shift in perception placed pressure on Karen, who seemed increasingly isolated and defensive, attempting to maintain her grip on authority while losing support from those she once commanded. Meanwhile, Karen's behavior underwent a notable transformation. No longer the confident enforcer, she walked the neighborhood with a cloud of frustration hanging over her head. The smugness that had characterized her interactions now gave way to uncertainty. Her attempts at asserting control were met with skepticism or outright challenge from residents emboldened by my actions. The tension was palpable as she found herself confronted not just by the lingering embarrassment of being bested, but also by a growing wave of dissent against her authoritarian tendencies. In meetings of the Homeowners Association, whispers circulated about revisiting the rules that governed our community. Residents began advocating for more balanced oversight, seeking a structure that fostered cooperation rather than fear. They expressed a desire for a more inclusive approach, one that allowed for dialogue instead of dictating behavior through threats and intimidation. Karen, sitting at the head of the table, could only watch as her usual sway diminished in the face of collective resolve. Amidst this shifting landscape, I continued to receive encouragement from my neighbors. Some even offered to help with various projects around my house, a gesture that solidified camaraderie and unity among us all. It felt liberating to connect with others who had felt similarly stifled. I wasn't just reclaiming my truck, but also contributing to an evolving sense of community where voices mattered. As time went on, it became clear that this incident had sparked a necessary conversation about power dynamics and accountability within Maplewood Estates. What had been a neighborhood characterized by conformity was now awakening to its potential for change and progress. With each passing day, Karen's influence waned further, replaced by an emerging culture centered on mutual respect and understanding. Looking back on that fateful encounter with Karen, I realized it was more than just an act of defiance. It was a catalyst for transformation within our community. I felt an overwhelming sense of pride as I watched neighbors step into their power, each individual now committed to ensuring that Maplewood Estates would thrive as a place where everyone could live freely without fear of unwarranted control. And in this newfound freedom, we all found our voices again. Reflecting on the tumultuous events that unfolded in Maplewood Estates, I realize how much I have grown through this experience. Standing up to Karen was not simply about reclaiming my truck. It became a pivotal moment of personal empowerment that taught me valuable lessons about self-advocacy, creativity in conflict resolution, and the importance of community dynamics. Initially, I felt overwhelmed by the situation, unsure of how to confront someone who had long wielded power over others. Yet, as tensions escalated, I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with conflict is not through aggression or confrontation but through ingenuity and strategic thinking. By creatively sabotaging my own truck, I turned what could have been a passive response into an active challenge against an oppressive force. This process reaffirmed my belief in the power of resourcefulness, finding solutions that fit the unique circumstances at hand rather than adhering strictly to conventional methods. Moreover, the incident illuminated the significance of standing firm in one's convictions. Throughout the confrontation with Karen, I found strength in my voice, a voice that had been somewhat muted by fear of retribution. In standing up for myself, I not only reclaimed my vehicle but also asserted my right to exist freely within the community without undue interference. It became clear that asserting boundaries is essential for maintaining one's dignity, especially when faced with those who believe they hold dominion over others. The aftermath of this conflict offered further insights into the nature of social dynamics within a neighborhood setting. The shift in relationships among residents highlighted how a single act of defiance could catalyze broader change. As neighbors began to rally around shared feelings of frustration toward Karen's authoritarianism, I witnessed firsthand how collective voices could dismantle long-standing hierarchies. It was heartening to see individuals who once kept their heads down now engaging in conversations and advocating for a more equitable community. This collective response served as a reminder that communities thrive on mutual respect and collaboration. No one should feel marginalized or silenced because of an individual's overreach. Through this experience, I have come to appreciate the importance of fostering open dialogue and encouraging participation among all residents. We must create environments where everyone feels empowered to share their perspectives and advocate for themselves without fear of retaliation. As I continue to navigate life in Maplewood Estates, I carry these lessons with me. Lessons about resilience, creativity, and the transformative power of community engagement. This episode has instilled in me a renewed sense of purpose, to contribute positively to the fabric of our neighborhood and ensure that it remains a place where every voice is heard and valued. In conclusion, standing up to Karen was about so much more than reclaiming my truck. It was about embracing my role as an active participant in shaping our community's identity. As Maplewood Estates moves forward from this incident, it does so with a renewed spirit, a collective commitment to fostering an environment where autonomy thrives alongside accountability. I am proud to be part of this evolving narrative and look forward to seeing what we can achieve together moving forward.